Welcome, everyone, to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. I'm your host, Coach Justin. I'm here with Coach Katie. And today is episode 87. And we're going to be talking about the top 10 biggest race day mistakes and how you can avoid them. I want to frame this in a way where we talk about failures, quote unquote failures. I don't want to call a race a failure because there's something that we can always walk away from, even though the result that you get may not be in line with your expectations or even in line with what you perceive to be your potential. So there's always something that we can walk away from. But race outcomes, in my opinion, rarely are limited by your fitness. I believe that it is an accumulation of small decisions that you made throughout the execution of your race contributes to whether that race met your expectations or somehow fell below them. So this is not going to be an episode on, how to train better or, how to get faster. That's not what I would consider to be a mistake, or not even necessarily. Maybe a mistake is a poor way to frame this. It's a non-optimal decision, because whether something is a mistake or not is kind of relative. So, but we wanted to bring this up because, we're getting closer and closer now to really the big kickoff of a race season. And so we wanted to put this in front of you as something just for you to think about as you are in your prep phase, or maybe you're starting to reach like a race build phase and you're doing some race specificity training. And these are some of these small decisions that I want you to really consider and think about during maybe some of your race simulation workouts and things as you start to prepare for race day. So these top 10, what we believe to be the top 10 mistakes that are made on race day really fall into like three primary buckets. We'll say that one bucket is going to be pacing mistakes. The next bucket kind of falls into is going to be fueling and hydration mistakes. And the third overall bucket is going to be execution and planning mistakes. So we're going to go with these one by one through the top 10, what we believe to be the top 10. You may have a different list of top 10, but this is what we've got. And so we're going to, let's just kick this off and just drive right into the discussion. These are not ranked in terms of like order of importance. It's not that number one is more or less important than number 10. All right. So keep that in mind. These are just numbered. The first one is going to be a pacing mistake, and it's starting off too fast. We see this commonly and routinely in both single sport race events as well as multi-sport race events. I can tell you from my own experience, I've fallen victim to this as well. And it's not necessarily the result of just poor race execution or poor planning, because you could line up on race day and have every intent of, hey, I'm going to start off a little bit slower. I'm going to let this build and really kind of control the effort at the first part of the race. You may have that intention, but it's really, really easy to get wrapped up in the adrenaline and the excitement of the day to be really flow with the crowd rather than standing your ground. And I think that that's one of the things that I've seen as a coach and experienced as an athlete is that you're surrounded just by hundreds of people, and it's easy to get swept up in their pace and trying to go with the flow rather than sticking with where it is that you feel you should be, and kind of what I call claiming my ground, putting a stake in the ground. This is my area. I'm going to execute my plan. And sometimes it's easy to get pulled into somebody else's. And what that really does is it starts to sabotage, and that will snowball. And how your day is going to ultimately wind up is because as you get swept up into them, you're really chasing paces that maybe you don't have any business chasing, or you start to get behind the eight ball on things because you're trying to keep that pace, i.e., you're you're sacrificing the intake of nutrition and hydration, which we'll talk about in this episode as well, because it's got to be like one of the common mistakes that we see. And as you start to really push that effort at the beginning, it's easy to get behind the eight ball on these other things that are just as important for your execution of your race. For a multi-sport, this is absolutely something that I see all the time. You're coming into these races and you're tapered and you've got these fresh legs and you're not used to having them. So it's really, really easy to say, I feel good, and get wrapped up in that feeling rather than saying, I feel good, but this is my strategy. This is my plan, and stick with the plan and not go with how you're feeling. Now, that's not to say that later in the race, if you're still feeling that way, maybe you start to be a little bit more aggressive with your strategy and plan. But we're talking, the later portions of the race. That kind of decision should not be made at the fire of the gun. Within the first half of your race, I want you to completely ignore your feelings, because your feelings will get you they will get you in trouble.
Yeah.
I've seen it. I've experienced it. But the expression that I see on Katie's face, she's seen this as well.
Well, I have an athlete. I was just like this week I was talking to her about, she's running the London Marathon, which is April 26th or something like that. She was saying that she starts out, their last race started out too fast because she got swept up by the crowds, and those marathons are huge numbers of people. It's very easy to kind of get swept up into with adrenaline and just the excitement of all the people cheering and all the people around you, to just get swept into a pace that you're not comfortable with. And she said she had been running, I think her last one, I couldn't remember which one it was, but she said she'd been running, and she finally looked down at her watch and she was kind of in the red zone, or she, on her heart rate was higher than it should have been. And this is now, I don't know what point, but 3-4 miles into the marathon, she's already sort of been swept up into this, and she's realizing it. And, for a marathon, it's a really tough thing to be, going out too fast, because if you do, you start to accumulate fatigue, you get potentially lactate and things like that building up. So it can be a really tough thing to be, doing that early on. And then she said she sort of suffered. I think it was maybe Tokyo was her last one. So she definitely had some issues with that. So this time I was talking about maybe even setting parameters on her watch, or certain things she could do to kind of slow down a little bit in those earlier miles. So just this week, it's common for people to kind of get swept up, I think, into the paces and into what everyone else is doing, and not even really paying attention because you're feeling so good in those early miles. But for something like a marathon or a longer course race, that can get you later. I've experienced it myself. It happens often.
Yeah. So I think that the kind of the big takeaway that I have from this particular quote unquote mistake is, I want you to keep in mind that the race doesn't really start until that last half. So, we're not racing the first part. We execute our plan in such a way that sets us up to race the second half, is really kind of what I want you to kind of keep in mind. For a triathlon, the race does not start until the run starts. Honestly, that's where really the rubber kind of meets the road. And absolutely, for long course triathlon, the race doesn't start until that second half of the run. The first half of the run, you're still kind of like into it and everything. So it can really kind of set you up. But really, that last half marathon, or even the last 10K of a full Ironman, that's when your race starts. That's when all of the decisions that you've made from chip times 0 to wherever it is that you are right now, this is where those decisions come to roost. You'll start to kind of see the impact of those decisions that you've made on where you are right now. And I feel it's so important, and I try and get this through to my athletes, and I try and do this as I am an athlete as well, is I've been working hard to completely ignore feelings and emotions when it comes to judging how you should execute, because that just snowballs and it gets you in trouble. I've seen it. I've
Absolutely, yeah.
experienced it. And so it's really common, like I said, when you're tapered and you're rested and you're not used to feeling that way, because throughout the training process, the idea is to accumulate fatigue, to build that adaptation. So you're never really rested. I don't care how many rest days you take throughout your training plan. If you're consistent, and even if you have just one rest day in there, that's not enough to shed all the accumulated fatigue. It's enough to kind of like, as we've used this illustration before with the paling of the water out of the boat, like the bucket example. Having just one rest day in there, you get a couple good buckets of water out of the boat, but that boat is still taking on water, and there's nothing that you can do about it.
Mm-hmm.
So when you
Absolutely.
come to race day, if you tapered properly, you should feel the best that you felt throughout the entire training process. So it's easy to get caught up in how you're feeling then. It's like, oh, maybe this race is going to go a lot better than what I thought it was going to be. That may definitely be the case, but don't make that assessment until it's appropriate, which you're
Right.
in the race. Make the assessment when you've actually gotten
And hopefully,
into the
like
race.
I mean, some people who are new maybe don't always it I think it's hard when you're new because maybe you've never done a marathon before. You've never done some of these races before. And so you really have to trust, like, at some point, hopefully, if you have a coach, you've kind of had a discussion about, how your training has gone and kind of a discussion about pacing. What pace you want to start out at, when do you decide like to go for it if you're feeling good. You mentioned the last last half marathon portion of an Ironman. For a marathon, the race really starts around mile 20. That's when it gets tough, and that's when, yeah, exactly, all of the decisions you've made those last 20 miles, it's gonna like that last 6 miles can make or break your entire race. And I've seen it happen. I've had it happen to me where I started out too fast or made fueling mistakes earlier, and it didn't fare well for me those last 6 miles. So it's so important but thinking about the pacing, because I think if you're not really sure, you can feel really good. I do think it's important to kind of really figure that out because you are going to feel good. And if you don't know what pace you're supposed to be at, then it's hard to know how to kind of keep that in control for the first half. But it does take a lot of kind of trusting, like it does take a little bit of like looking at your watch and kind of paying attention to heart rate. And sometimes I know people don't like to do that, and I know people kind of like to go off of feel, but in this case I do think this is important, at least to kind of check in to see where you're at, make sure you're not pushing too far beyond your abilities that from all the training you've done. If you're like a 7-minute marathon runner and you're doing 6:30s, the first several miles might catch you later because that's a huge jump in pace, and that might be more like a 10K pace or half marathon because of all the damage you're sort of doing early on trying to hit those faster paces. Once you get later in the marathon, you're not going to have the ability to kind of recover from doing that if you're doing it for too long. Now, if you start out too fast for like the first half mile or mile, you might be able to slow down and kind of catch up and recover a little bit. So, don't be freaking out if you're like, oh no, I'm a mile in and I'm going 15, 20 seconds faster than I should. I think it's just that's why you want to check in and be like, okay, I need to slow down a little bit, kind of catch up, make sure I'm not overdoing it, kind of give my body a chance to kind of recover, and then you should be fine. I mean, it's not as though if you start out too fast and, the first 100 meters, you decide you're going to kind of sprint, that as long as you're catching yourself, I think you're fine. It's just if you're getting so caught up that you're racing, halfway through your Ironman and you're like racing as if it's a half Ironman, that's probably not a bright
It's
idea,
gonna
right?
be a
So
rough
yeah,
day.
it's gonna be a rough one. The rest of that race, I mean, you might be able to hang on for dear life, but yeah.
Yeah.
So,
All right, so this takes us. I think that we've kind of exhausted that one. So let's roll into the next one. And I kind of
yeah,
alluded to this a little bit. So, Katie, go ahead and bring us the mistake number 2.
yeah. So fueling strategies. So like a poor fueling strategy, you're not executing your fueling strategies. So um, this would be like kind of that thinking like, oh, I'm just gonna take something in when I kind of feel like I need it. No, I'm not really gonna have a plan. I'm just gonna have some things with me, and then when I feel like my energy is starting to run low, I'm gonna take something. Or I think this happens a lot where maybe you do have a plan that you've thought about where you're like, I'm gonna fuel and you just are like, "Oh, I feel good," or I just don't wanna have to take my stuff in, right now. I'm feeling good, I don't wanna take it. I know I'm supposed to start fueling at 30 minutes. I'm gonna wait a little bit, or, or maybe the opposite. You get caught up in all this high carb fueling, stuff like David Roach or some of those other people out there that are really, like, taking in tons of carbs, like, and maybe you've never practiced it, but you're like, I'm gonna try to take in a whole bunch of carbs on race day, and you haven't maybe done that before, or you haven't practiced it, so you're just kind of taking a ton all at once, or way more than you need, or even just trying a totally new product or fuel the day of the race could be just like, we'll talk a little bit about trying new things, but those are all common mistakes. I think it's really important that you not wait until you're feeling poorly, because once you're starting to run out of glycogen, so let's say, that could be potentially like in a marathon, maybe an hour to 90 minutes in, you're already behind the 8 ball. Once you start to have those feelings of, fatigue, or just kind of like your energy starting to drop a little bit and you need something, it's too late. You're already in trouble. There's not really much you can do at that point to recover from that. So you could take in some fuel at that point, but you're already starting to run low on glycogen. And then if you do decide you're going to then smash 3 gels all at once or something like that, then you run into this potentially like GI issues and, doing it all at once. So, because it's a little bit better if you can kind of take in the fuel, let's say just as an example, every 30 minutes. So you're sort of slowly taking it in. You're not doing too much all at once. You might take in a few gels at once if you've been practicing that, but you're not then taking, 10 gels or something in the course of 30 minutes and trying to take in all of the things that you forgot to take the first, 90 minutes, for instance. So you can't really, even if you did that, your body can only process so much carbohydrate at once just from exogenous sources eating it. So you're just behind the 8 ball. You're going to have a struggle the rest of the time. That is why, like, one of my mantras is like fuel early and fuel pretty often. For each person, it might be a little bit of different how and often they're fueling, but starting out, 20, 30 minutes in, which is really hard to do when you feel good during a race. Like for a triathlon, you're probably not taking in a gel during the swim, but you're probably going to get out of the water onto the bike. And at some point, really soon, at that point, you're starting your fueling, either in transition, taking something, or on the bike. And so it's just really, really important that you do that. And it's hard to do because you're like, I need to get going. I'm feeling good. I'm just going to wait. Right. But you can't, because then once you wait and once it's too far and you've kind of started, your fueling strategy is now off because you're now waited and then everything's backed up a little bit, then you run into the issue of, kind of hitting the wall sooner, and you can't recover from that really once that starts, or once you get that point. So if anything, like, please make this a priority, because I've made this mistake before, like early into my marathon journey. I'm just either not fueling enough in general, or just feeling good and being like, I'm gonna push this off. I'm gonna push this off. I'm feeling good now, but once you're feeling bad, there's no coming back. Really, you can't recover. So important. Yeah. Do you have any, like, I don't know, any experiences or thoughts
Yeah,
yourself?
so this is one of the things that I think that I struggled with primarily in my early times of when I started doing racing. I've learned a lot over the years about this particular issue. I still don't have it right. And so after over 10 years of doing this, there's still stuff that I'm toying with. There's still stuff I'm experimenting with, and I still make mistakes, but I think I've gotten a lot better. For a triathlon, the way that I would execute it is typically I'll take in maybe like a honey stinger waffle before I get in the water, because I don't want a gel, because I'll be taking in gels during the swim,
Right.
during the bike and the run, so I want some different texture. So I'll go with a honey stinger waffle before the swim, and then do the swim, and then get on the bike, and I don't take in any nutrition until I'm about like maybe 5 or 10 minutes into the bike, because I don't want to be fumbling with packaging and trying to take in stuff while everybody's trying to get on their bike and settled. So I like to get a little bit more spacing, because it's just too chaotic at that bike mountain line where people are like hitting buttons on watches and they're trying to get clipped in and all this kind of stuff. It's too chaotic. So wait,
Right.
until like between that 5 and 10 minute mark, and then start, taking in some
Really.
fuel. So I'll hit a gel then, and depending on the length, I'll consume on a schedule. I've learned that lesson to where I cannot trust myself enough to eat based on when I feel like I need it, because like you said, once you feel it, it's too late. There's nothing that you can do, and you can't play catch up. Um,
Yeah.
I've tried to play the catch up game several times, and it's just led to GI issues, and then my stomach shuts down, and then you can't take in anything because your stomach is like, nope, we're not doing that.
Even if you have to set like a alarm, I don't know. I'm not
I
great
set
with
it on
like
my
the
Garmin.
Garmin.
I
Yeah,
get it
Garmin.
when
Okay.
I go through training. I have my Garmin. It will buzz to me like every 10 to 15 minutes, and that's either buzzing to tell me, hey, look at me, and we're either going to take in some water or some liquid nutrition or a gel. So it's keeping me in the moment. I never kind of get settled in, because then once I start settled in, then I'll zone out, and then I completely disregard my fueling strategy. So
Right.
I have that little reminder just saying, hey, at the 10-minute mark, we're either going to drink some water, we're going to drink some electrolytes, or, that type of nutrition, or we're considering a gel or some other kind of fuel
It's
like
a good
that.
one
And
to
so,
have that because I think a lot of people kind of do get like sucked in their
yeah.
focus, which is great. You're kind of maybe in the zone, which is a good thing, but we do need to take in fuel. So I think it could be common, especially for like an Ironman where you're riding your bike for 112 miles to just sort of like get in locked in. But you don't want to be like, oh no, now 30 miles have passed or something like that. And I haven't, or 10 or 20 miles or however, depending on how long that's taking you. But you don't want to be like caught off guard with that and like, oh no, so to have something to remind you, I think, yeah, if you can set that on your Garmin or your watch that you use, that would be probably the best strategy. um, I do check my watch quite frequently during my marathons just to kind of see if I'm on pace or, where I'm at. So I generally kind of know, or a lot of times, and this is probably true for triathlon or most races, there's like markers where you are. So sometimes I will actually be like, okay, at the 5K mark, I'm going to take in my first gel at that 5K mark and then at the 10K mark, or, so it's kind of like that could be the way you do it is like, okay, once I hit this point, and then my watch does buzz at me when I hit like a mile each mile. So it's like I have that setting on there where it just kind of like tells, you know, gives me the pace sometimes. So I'll use that, as a way to do it too, just to kind of know where I'm at. But sometimes, yeah, it'll just be just some sort of way to remind yourself, okay, I'm at this point. This is what I'm taking in. Okay, I made it to mile 10, and, on the bike, I'm going to take in, or 5, or whatever it is, you take in your gel or your fuel. And so some sort of strategy to figure out when that's going to be. And that's kind of individual to each person.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I find that the time-based strategy works better,
better.
um,
Yeah,
because
probably.
a
But
distance-based one can really kind of come and bite you a little bit later, because
if you're slowing.
as pace degrades, you may run that first 5K pretty speedy, and then what's going to be the pace that you run the second 5K and the third 5K. It can
Yeah,
take you longer and longer to get these 5Ks done, and what that's doing is it's forcing you to go longer and longer before
right,
you
that's true.
refuel.
Yeah, I think
So
too,
that's just
probably
something
for
to
like
keep in mind.
Ironman maybe where you're in the marathon where yeah. But for if you've executed like a marathon correctly, hopefully, you're doing it close. I mean, you might slow down a little bit, but hopefully your pace is staying. Unless you really like negative or positive split it, like where something's slowing down or speeding up a little bit, like you're hopefully the strategy is like it's only off by a few minutes each time, if you're doing the execution of the race correctly. Hopefully you're not degrading that much that it's a huge difference by the end, but I know that does happen. So you may want to have some other, okay, if I slow down, I'm going to have another gel. But you're going to have to think about this is part of, I think, racing is kind of thinking about the different scenarios and then you don't want to be overly thinking about it so much that it's causing anxiety, but you want to kind of think, okay, maybe if I do slow down or if something happens, I want to take in another gel, or if it's a hot day and everything's kind of out the window, like my whole fueling strategy needs to be changed slightly because I'm maybe going to have to be out there longer because I can't run that same pace and I'm going to have to hydrate differently. Like you might have to just kind of think about like some of those scenarios and have like a plan B sort of situation too, so that you can kind of, okay, well, I might have to take that in a little bit more frequently, potentially. So anyway, just something to think, to have. I think part of racing is thinking about a few of those scenarios that might be common and how you might adjust things for that,
Yeah.
not, but you don't want to overly think about it to the point you've analyzed everything and, either.
Yeah, so let's go to mistake number 3, and it's ignoring hydration. So this is something that I want to make a distinction between, and I'm curious on what your thoughts are. Is the way that I think about this is I think of hydration as just pure water. Now, that's different from what I would call like a nutrition strategy, which can be fluids with electrolytes and carbohydrates in it. So it's like your tailwind, your scratch, all your other kind of electrolyte products. I consider that to be part of the nutrition strategy. It's just a liquid based nutrition, and then you can work in the solids as well. But for me, hydration is just water based. No, nothing added to it. So what I typically will do for my execution strategy, what I work with my athletes on, is that we have this nutrition strategy, which can be a combination of liquids and solids or just pure liquids. And then we have a hydration strategy as well. So there's going to be a need for just plain water. This is especially true during hot and humid races as well. I just from my experience, if you're only taking in stuff that has electrolytes in it, it just kind of sits on your stomach a little bit, especially in the heat and the humidity. And so I find that if I'm maybe rotating in, a sip of electrolytes at one feeding spot, and then just do pure water at the next feeding spot, it's not getting me behind the 8 ball, but it is keeping that palate cleansed and is keeping my stomach balanced. Um, but I'm proactive about it. It's part of the schedule. So it's not I do not ever drink to thirst, because then if you're drinking when you're thirsty, again, you're late. You're already behind the 8 ball. And
I do think you're right, but I think it's hard because the other fluids do count towards your hydration. So any fluid you're taking in during race, whether it has electrolytes or carbs or just plain water, is all contributing to hydration, because it all contains fluid. So I think it's like you kind of want to consider both, like you're saying, but I also think you do need to make sure you're also considering it all together. Like how much total fluid are you
yes,
getting per hour? Have you kind of calculated that? I mean, to get to like the nitty gritty, there's a lot of things you can kind of do to figure out your hydration. One would be just weighing yourself before and after workout, making sure every other parameter is the same. Like if you do go pee, you kind of also have to account for that. So that's kind of the hard part is how much fluid are you actually losing, and trying to get an idea of how much of that's coming from sweat. And to do that kind of maybe weigh naked, and then, you're kind of calculating out that hydration rate of sweat loss. And you might want to do that in different conditions, like when it's cooler, warmer, or really hot out. And when you can wear like sweat sodium patches that you can find that are pretty cheap through like Gatorade makes them to get an idea of your sodium losses during different scenarios. And so there's ways to kind of figure this out. I think and then you kind of come up with like a hydration strategy. And within that, you should be consuming enough fluid to meet that, so that whether that's coming from an electrolyte drink or pure water, but you do want to make sure you're also getting in that sodium, at least. You may not be able to get 100% of it, but trying to get in that sodium you're losing. Because on the flip side of this, believe it or not, there have been times where an athlete has only taken in water, no electrolytes at all, or no sodium. And then there's actually been times, and this is rare, very rare, where somebody has died from hyponatremia, where all they're taking in is water, 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 and no sodium. And they're basically like diluting the cells. And there's a whole cast. I think we've talked about this a bit in our hydration episode. We talked all about this. So go back to our hydration episode to sort of get the nitty gritty here. But the concept here is like you do want to have kind of a plan, and it may involve both like plain water and electrolytes, and whether you kind of think of them separately or not all as one part of your hydration strategy, just making sure you're doing both and you're not just like taking in tons and tons of water without the other things that you need, because it can ruin your race. Like, you don't want to be on the sidelines with either extreme dehydration because you didn't take in enough and now you're underhydrated and you're having cramps and they have to pull you because you're so dehydrated, or on the other side you're so overly hydrated with water and not enough sodium that you're having to be pulled from the course and then maybe even go to the hospital because that's a serious condition. And so it's really important to kind of get this at least figured out before race, and then execute it. Just like with the fueling, don't think, oh, I'm like feeling good, I don't need to hydrate. It's the same. You need to be on your schedule. It's important.
I think
That's
the bottom
another
line
thing.
that we can come to a conclusion about is that these hydration and nutrition strategies, the problems will show up later in your race, but really they start at the beginning of the race. And so it's a accumulation over time.
Yeah.
Whether you're not executing your hydration or nutrition strategy appropriately at the beginning, and then you start to really kind of see things fall off. And I think what happens is that athletes will interpret that as poor fitness. And so then they go into the next race thinking that they need to train harder and longer in order to improve their fitness, because they think that the degradation in their performance by the end of the race is because they just weren't fit enough and they didn't train enough, rather than looking at the flip side of the coin and say, no, your fitness was fine. The way that you executed your nutrition and hydration strategy needs some work. And so really kind of stepping back and looking at really kind of like what is the reason for my perceived poor performance at the end of the race, and critically evaluating that is really, really important.
I think really like this is where the practicing, this is why we said this so many times, like practicing these things in your training is so important. So you know what it feels like to have fuel, and trying to get the hydration practiced, and so you know what that's going to be like and how that makes a difference. When you are like, I know it makes a huge difference for me when I'm doing my fueling right, and not only how my training's going, but also like how I'm recovering from that. And so it's just even seeing that in my training. The other thing I just want to say too is for a marathon is some people take hydration with them, and that's fine. If you're relying on the cups on the course, it just take your time. Like, you don't have to stop totally and like drink, but slow down a little bit for those aid stations. Slow down, take in what you need. It's okay to slow down a little bit and then just speed up for a short period of time to kind of catch up a little bit, but you don't want to be I think sometimes people just kind of blow through there, grab like one thing to drink, especially if it's a hot day. You're going to want to slow down and just take your time getting in that hydration that you need. Because if you don't do that and you think, oh, I don't want to waste my time in the aid station getting some fluids, it's going to catch you later and you're going to slow down inevitably anyway. So just don't, that's another mistake I see people make, is just blowing through. I mean, some people are very skilled at taking in the water and some, but if you're not, or you want to make sure you're getting enough, just slow down, jog a little bit, take in what you need, and then take off then. And then if you have to increase the pace just slightly to kind of catch up a little bit of time, it's better to do that, for, maybe a short period just to kind of get back to where you were than to like just blow through the aid stations without taking in fluid. So,
Yeah. One of the
yeah.
little tricks that I use when I go through an aid station is because they're all paper cups.
Mhm.
And so what I'll do is I'll grab the cup and then I pinch the
Yeah.
top of the cup so that
Right.
it creates a little narrow crepe, and then it's easier to get everything in the cup, because what you find is that people will just go through there
And
and
they just
they spill more on their self than they actually get in their mouth, and they
I have
think
that
that they're
problem
fueling
sometimes. Yeah.
appropriately. It's just like you just missed half of the cup and there was hardly anything in the cup to begin with. That's the little
Yeah, I
trick
take like a
that we use,
water
is just
and
pinch
drink
it.
it, an electrolyte, and then if it's hot, I take another water and just pour it on my head,
Yeah. Yep.
to cool down. But yeah, yeah. It takes a little bit of an art. You can even practice. If you have like a low key race, where you could just practice that strategy, just the cup strategy.
Yeah.
um,
All
yeah.
right, so number 4. Give us number
Yeah,
4,
so we'll
Katie.
do that one's like doing new gear on race day. I don't know, I feel like this one most people hear, but I still have those stories I hear of people who bought that new pair of shoes like the day before at the expo. They're like, "Oh, I'm gonna try these shoes, or I'm gonna get some of those super shoes with the carbon plates the day before and try that, the day of." It could work for you, but I mean, generally, like, I even think about the shoes that I wear for even like the shoes that I wear just general for training, I will wear those things a few times on an easy run before I actually do like a long run, because it takes a little bit of time to just kind of like pair of new shoes it almost has a little bit of time that you need to wear it in a little bit. I never judge that shoe until I've had a few runs in it, because sometimes the very first run doesn't go well, or I have a little bit of chafing or something, but it just generally it gets a little bit better after I've worn it a few times. So don't it's probably a mistake generally just to try new shoes, or even just a new like clothing is another example where it something like if you have a kit or something you're going to wear, or you're gonna have like a race jersey or something, to wear it ahead of time a few times, because you may not know, or even for a long run, hopefully, because you can figure out if it's gonna have some chafing somewhere. I wore a pair of shorts for my last half marathon, which was warm, and they were a little bit short, and they chafed like the inside of my thighs, and it was, like, bad, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm like, "I shouldn't have done." And that was a pair I've had, but it was just at the warm day, and just like, I was throwing water on my head, and all the kinda caused some chafing, and sometimes that just happens and it's uncomfortable, but if you can make sure whatever you're wearing, doesn't cause those issues that ahead of time, that would be my suggestion. So just nothing really new that you haven't had a chance to break in, like goggles, like you could talk a little bit about triathlon. Nutrition we've already talked about, but again, don't try a new nutrition gel or something you haven't tried before on race day, because it's like GI issues are such a bummer. You just
Yeah.
having to go to the porta potty midway, or having to have several, or even just like they could take you out completely, totally ruin your race. So yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty self-explanatory, but do you have anything to add to
I
this?
don't know if I
Anything
have
you've
anything to add,
experienced?
but I do have a story
Yeah,
from
stories are
one of my
good.
races. And it's just such a bad it's such a bad example, but I did this was years ago, and the race is no longer with us. So I did Ironman Syracuse 70.3 up in upstate New York. And I picked the race because I was like, oh, it's early in the season. And so, it's in upstate New York, so it should be fairly cool and temperate and no problems. And I said, well, I kind of want to try some race wheels and put some nice, like, deep dish race wheels on my bike. But I didn't own a pair, so I rented a pair and I found a shop that rented race wheels. And because, of course, I was renting them and I was cheap, I didn't rent them early enough in order to ride them before race day. I just went, like, before we left town, picked up the race wheels, and it's like, all right, let's go. And I had no idea what these things were going to feel like. And I get I get into the race and the swim went well, and I got on the bike and it was windy. Oh my, the wind was
Oh no.
insane. And up and down these huge hills. I don't want to call them mountains, but they were some
Yeah,
significant
it's hilly
hills.
over there. Yeah.
And the winds were coming across, they were coming from every direction. But if you've ever ridden on deep dish wheels, when that crosswind comes, that will turn your handlebars faster than anything you've ever experienced. And I was on edge the whole ride,
Oh,
scared to death, riding my brakes because I did not know how to ride race wheel, like deep dish carbon wheels in high wind conditions, going up and down huge hills. But like halfway through the bike portion, I wanted to just take the wheels and just throw them into the woods.
you're like,
I was so done with that stupid bike, and just a bad decision that I made. And I think that I've seen other posts about people. It's like, hey, can I rent a bike or whatever? At the race. I understand that for travel purposes, but unless you're renting a bike that you've actually trained on, then I don't want you training on a road bike and then renting a TT bike for your race, because it
yeah,
is
because that's a
not
whole
going to go
different,
well.
yeah.
Even different brands. So if you've trained on a TT bike, but you don't have the same brand at the race venue that what you've trained on, I could argue that I don't know if that's going to be a very good decision to make. It might be worth just sucking it up and just going with the expense of shipping the bike, or, having a bike box and carrying it with you on the plane, because there's
Right.
nothing worse than being on that bike and the bike is the longest portion of the race and you're not comfortable. You don't know how it handles. You don't know how to work with it. And the conditions that you're having to face, whether you have high winds, are they tailwinds, front winds, cross winds, how are you able to reach behind and grab nutrition? If you're not used to handling this bike, then you're less likely to take your hands off of the handlebars and go grab a water bottle. Now, not only have you screwed your whole bike portion, but now you're way behind the eight ball on nutrition because you didn't know how to handle the gear. And so that's one of the things that I can recommend, just based on my experience on
Yeah, that's a good one.
what I've
That's a
gone
good one.
through. It's
Because
a frustrating
when I did
scenario.
triathlon, I only did like local races. I never flew anywhere. We always drove somewhere. So I didn't ever have to like bring my bike or rent anything. So I never had any of the issues like that. But yeah, that makes sense because I could see that for like a triathlon for sure. So even the bike, is obviously a big piece. Yeah, I feel like I feel like people hear that a lot and believe us. Like it's not a good idea to try something
Yeah.
new. You'll learn.
I don't buy anything new for a race. If I'm buying something that I want to use on race day, it's like a month before the race takes place, and then I'm using that during training. And
For
so, yeah.
instance, that like for my race, I'm actually bought a cheaper pair because they're so expensive, like the older pair of a carbon shoe, a New Balance, because I've been liking their shoes lately. And if I like it, like I just bought the older version, and then I'm going to probably early May or sometime mid May buy maybe another version of it or the newer version, which is so expensive. But I do like the carbon plated shoes. They do make you feel fast. And then try them out and wear them a few times at least, like to really understand if they're going to work for race day. Because also the other thing is if they don't, I want to have enough time to pivot. And I know there's a pair I've worn before, like the ultra carbon shoes. So I would just have to pivot and maybe try going back to what I know, but I want to have enough time to be able to wear them a few times before the race. So I don't want to be like figuring out that this isn't going to work like 3 days before my race and then having to pivot at that point. Is it going to work so well? So really kind of having like, especially for those types of shoes, you don't want to wear them a ton, like because they work best when they're a little bit more fresh, but you do not want to like have a new fresh pair generally like the day of the race. You do want to wear them and know, because I had a pair I bought of that it was another brand, and I wore them for like, I don't know, like a workout, and 10 miles in my feet were killing me, and I tried it again, and yes, like the longer I went in them, the worse my feet started to like have a lot of issues. And so it was just really good to know that, and I didn't wear those shoes for a marathon because I could couldn't get that far, you know?
Yeah.
So you don't want to find that out on race day because then you'll be in a lot of pain.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah.
All right, so
How about
let's
the
let's
next one? Yeah.
we'll move on to mistake number 5. So this is poor bike pacing, and so this is kind of more multi-sport specific, or even if you're just a single sport cyclist as well. I see this way more than what I would like to see, and a lot of it is it's ego riding. It's really easy to get caught up when somebody, maybe if somebody's passing you, to really, it's like, heck no, that person's not going to pass me. And then you just kind of open it up a little bit, or you're trying to stay with a pack that you may not should try and associate with. I mean, I've seen it so much that, because when you get on the bike, you're still feeling really, really good. I mean, you've only swam so far, and so you're really kind of early into the day, and you didn't really use your legs at all for the swim, very minimal, in order to just maintain balance within the water. And so, and if you wore a wetsuit, you really didn't have to kick that much anyway, because that thing kept you up. So it's really easy to kind of get into the bike with feeling really, really fresh legs, and to really kind of open things up. But what I've found is that there's no such thing as a good bike split and a bad run. What that is the result of is poor bike pacing. You rode the bike in such a way that did not set you up for a good run performance. So you overbiked. And this is something that I see a lot of. And it's something that I've experienced as an athlete myself. The bike is my favorite part of the triathlon. I love it. And so it's really easy for me to get swept up in the emotion and the feelings, because I'm really enjoying myself, and I'm seeing great performance, and my power is right where I want it to be, and I'm passing people, and I'm gaining ground, and I'm having fun doing it. But I have to constantly remind myself, hey, do not get swept up in this moment. Do not get swept up in the emotion and in the quote unquote enjoyment that you're feeling being on this bike, because that means that run is going to be a lot harder than what you want it to be. So you have to ride it in such a way that sets you up for a good run performance. And that really takes a lot of discipline to really kind of hold back a little bit, and not ride your bike as a cyclist, but you're riding it as a triathlete. And so a lot of times what I'll see is, what I've experienced is, a lot of triathletes will go and talk to cyclists on how to improve their riding. The one thing that I caution about that is because, yeah, cyclists are really good at cycling, but they don't ride their bike in such a way that they have to run afterwards. And so I've talked to people where there's like, oh yeah, you should pedal down hills and all this kind of stuff. You're giving up free speed. And I think that there's some validity to that kind of methodology, definitely as a cyclist. But you really have to consider, well, what are going to be the costs of me, really pedaling down this hill at a higher cadence, higher gear ratio in order to gain speed, if that means that it's going to take a little bit more out of my legs? Why don't I maybe coast a little bit down the hill, give just a few seconds of rest to the legs, really get them to reset, and then start to pedal again? Is it going to affect your cadence and your overall, like your variability index, which is that spread between your normalized power and your average power? Yeah, it will, because it means that you're not being as consistent throughout the pedal stroke and throughout the duration of the race. But we're thinking big picture here, right? I want to ride the bike in such a way that allows me to run well. And poor bike pacing is what I have found to be the main culprit for bad run performance for a triathlon. And yeah, I don't know how else to talk about that one.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I'm like trying to think of my own experience. I don't know. I always feel like I just kind of got through the swim and the bike, and then the run was when I was actually like in the race for me. I always felt like I got to the run and I was like, oh, here I go. And I was always good to go. So I must have never gone too hard on the bike. I don't know. I don't remember. Yeah. I don't have my own experiences with that, and I never did anything longer than a half Ironman. But
what I think is that a lot of athletes will come back from poor performance during a race where the run kind of fell apart, but they had a really good bike. And then they think, oh, I need to focus more on my run.
The run. Oh, yeah. That
So
makes
they're
sense. Yeah.
really kind of putting the focus on the wrong piece of their training. No,
Yeah.
your run may be perfectly fine. You need to learn discipline on the bike that allows you to run off of it. So,
Right.
and
Yeah.
I've made that same mistake as well, early on in my career, where it's like, I was like, man, my bikes are great, but my runs are in the toilet. I was like, I need to run more. No, I needed to learn how to
Pacing. Yeah.
use the tools that I have as a part of the overall strategy. So I don't want you to think about, okay, I don't want you to think about the bike as you're on it. I want you to think about the run while you're on it. It's like, am I riding in such a way now that is going to allow me to capitalize on my strengths? You may have felt great on the run because you are a runner.
Yeah,
That's your
that's what I was
background.
thinking.
So that might be kind of contributing to, it's like, oh, well, my bike was great, but when I got on the run, I felt fantastic because that's your strength. But
Right. Yeah.
if the run isn't necessarily your strength, then you really should start to consider putting more focus on your bike fitness, because the stronger you are in the bike, even though your run isn't up to par with the bike, it will improve the quality of your run performance as you get more and more fit on the bike.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah. Makes sense. So let's dive into the
Yeah, number
sixth
6.
one. So no not warming up. I think this one, I think I'm kind of thinking from the perspective of any race distance. I do think like the shorter the faster the race, the longer, the more time you kind of want to spend warming up. So like for a 5K, for instance, I will do a bit of a longer warm up because because of the pace, or even like a mile race on a track or something, because I need to be able to like get going very quickly, very fast. It's whereas like a marathon, I do think there is you do need to do some sort of warm up, but because you're going to be out there for so long, you don't want to overdo the warm up, because then you'll be, have kind of burnt a little too much energy, So it's a little bit dependent on the race, but for like a 5K, you might want to do like a 20-minute jog and like some of those activation drills and some strides and things like that beforehand. Whereas for a lot of my marathons, I might do like 5 to maybe 10 minutes of very easy like jogging just to warm up my legs a little bit, some activation movements, some like hip swings, just like various things to just kind of be ready for the race to activate those muscles. And then, if I do a stride, it's like maybe 1 or 2, but I'm not overdoing that either. It's just to get my body a little bit ready and primed, but I'm not spending a long time warming up. But I still think it's important to do some form of a warm up, because if you just do nothing and you start for a marathon, maybe you can kind of warm into it. I don't generally recommend doing that, but if let's say you're running late to it or something and you just have to jump in, at least you have 26 miles, so you can kind of use the first few miles to kind of warm into it. And that, maybe is one way to strategize not going out too fast for those faster races where you really need to like be able to get into that pace and be going at a very fast clip. It's extremely important to warm up, because you need to let your body you need to get your body primed to do what you need to do on a race. So I know for running, that's kind of my thoughts about that. I would just never do a race and just start, unless you're just kind of jogging it for fun, and then it's not a problem. But if you're actually racing, you need to really have it and even practice kind of what you're doing for a warm up on race day, maybe even in before some of your harder workouts, just to kind of have that down and know exactly what you're doing, and kind of how the flow is going to go. Um, but yeah, I don't know. For triathlon, I'm trying to think how I used to do it. I think I used to jog a little bit and then maybe get in the water a little bit and swim a bit. Kind of do a little bit of swimming, just so I wasn't totally like, the swim was my always my like hardest one. And I just wanted to kind of like be kind of used to what the water temperature was going to be like, and be kind of get a little bit in the water and just, okay, I think I'm going to be okay. I had to do something in the water before the swim start. But I don't know what you recommend for triathlon, because it's been a while since I've done it. I don't even know if I was doing any of it correctly. Sometimes I just do what felt right. But yeah, I'm
Well,
curious
I can tell you what I typically will do is, I mean, I see a lot of people at triathlons and they're out there running or they're jogging and stuff like that. I've never gone with that approach, mainly because I don't feel like I need to warm up for the run, because I'm doing the run after I've already biked. So when it comes time to run, my legs are all going, everything's going to be warmed up already. So I don't need like that kind of specificity in my warm up.
Right.
Likewise,
Yeah, I
I
get
don't
that.
really warm up for the bike either. Um,
Well,
so my
because you're going
approach
out of the
is,
swim into the bike, so you're
yeah, so
already
your
kind of
body is
warm.
already
Yeah.
kind of like, your heart rate is elevated, everything is flowing, your muscles are already kind of loosened up during the swim to prepare you for the bike. So I don't find that that's particularly useful either. So my focus for warm ups is purely swim focused warm up. Unfortunately, the way that Ironman does it is they don't allow you to get into the water race morning prior to a
Oh,
race.
right.
That's
Okay.
especially
I didn't know
true
that.
if you have, river swims, things that are like point to point, like Chattanooga and things like that. But even something like Lake Placid, where it's in a lake, you still cannot get into the water
Oh,
race
okay. I didn't
morning.
know that.
They
Yeah.
do open it up for, I think it's like the day before or maybe a couple days before, they'll have a swim practice where you can come in and they've got support out there and you can swim parts of it. But that's not the case at places like Chattanooga because it's a free flowing river and it's a point to point swim. So you really can't get in there.
Okay.
What I did for Chattanooga is I went across the river and swam against the current and just jumped in and just tried to swim against it because it's effectively like you're swimming in place because the current is so
Mm-hmm.
strong that you really don't
One
go
of those
anywhere.
endless pools.
It was like an endless pool when I did it. And so that was kind of my warm up. But I find now as I'm getting older and the joints that I have and the tight muscles and things like that, I just focus purely on just uh dry land movements. So I went and got some really light resistance bands and I used just different muscle activations, pull aparts and things like that to really kind of get my lats to activate and get that range of motion in my shoulders. And that's my primary warm up. I'm not real. I don't get into the water beforehand, but I've been doing this for quite a while, so I know what to expect. I will show up to the race venue like those few days earlier if they have those swim practices. I do get in there. I do take advantage of that since you don't get it on race day. Some of the local races will allow you to get into the water and kind of warm up. If that's the case, then definitely take advantage of it. At least that gets your body used to the temperature of the water so that you know what to expect when the gun goes off. Because there's nothing worse with the water being colder than what you expect it to be. And now you're trying to settle into a swim. The water is colder than what you thought. You've got all the congestion and all the people and the adrenaline and the excitement. And it's just one more sensory overload to
Right.
the body. And it's kind of hard to get settled in. So if you can do it. But I find for me in particular, just doing those dry land warm ups in order to get the mobility and the elasticity and the muscle that I need for the swim is sufficient. And by the time I get out of the water, my body is warmed up, muscles are loose, and so I just jump. I just go right from the bike
Jump
and then
in.
to the run.
Yeah. Right.
I
Yeah.
don't find it particularly helpful to do those sport specific warm ups.
Right. Yeah. I just like jogging just because it kind of warmed up just generally my body, but it wasn't like I did much of it. And then I think it was just, yeah, kind of getting in the water a little bit for the races I did. They let you kind of get in the water. But
I mean, I
yeah,
understand it
that
from a
makes sense.
perspective of
Yeah.
like you want to get the heart rate up a little bit and you want to
Yeah,
get
that's
things
just what
flowing, but
yeah, because I'm a
I
runner,
mean,
it just was,
I
I'm
get it.
used to just jogging a little bit, but, it wasn't like anything crazy, maybe like 5 minutes of just a little bit of jogging, then I would put my wetsuit on and then kinda go over to the water, so, I think it's just kind of figuring out what works and makes you feel ready, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
that's the key, but you don't wanna just, like, maybe jump in totally without any sort of activation or especially for running. For me as a master's athlete, I really do need like I could never just like get to the 5K and just run it. It would take me the first mile just to like feel like my legs and be able to like get to the pace. I have to have some sort of warm up to like get my legs going and I mean maybe when I was 20 I could do that, but now not so much. So it's really important I think also as you age. But yeah, let's move on to the next.
Yeah, so number 7 is letting others dictate your race. And I think I alluded to this several times already. Definitely I alluded to it in the bike in the bike pacing, so this might be a little bit short, but it's really easy to get caught up in the moment and I definitely see this more on the bike than I do in the other two disciplines. And it's really kind of like chasing after these paces and efforts that aren't necessarily advisable at that particular stage of your race. Like I said, a lot of it tends to be ego riding. Um, for running only for running events, uh, I, I I've seen where it's
Yeah,
similar
I
as
think,
well. You
yeah,
get
it
caught
is.
up in the corral, and
And
you're trying to
usually,
keep pace with
yeah.
something, but
I mean, usually you're in a corral in those big races with other people who have run that same pace. So generally they kind of group it. But you always have those people, and this is where you have to just like be able to have your ego, check your ego, because there's always those people that just go out too fast, and you'll catch them later, I promise. They're doing, especially if they're in the corral with you, they're, unless they really somehow like underestimated their pace or something weird happened with their pacing to get into that corral, and they're actually much faster than they are. Let those people go, because they'll probably be caught later in the race, especially for a really long race like a marathon. You'll get them later. Just be patient. I think patience here is a little bit important. I mean, quite important. Um, I think for if somebody like is at your same pace, you can let people kind of pull you along a little bit. I think having competitors, like as long as they're not like going way faster than you're capable of, kind of pull you, and having that sort of motivation is great. But if that person is going faster than you're capable of, or there's something, you can't like totally dictate your whole race on what that other person is. You can strategize, you can use people to help pull you along. I think that's great. Or even like kind of tuck in behind people if it's windy and maybe let them be your windbreaker, maybe. But don't. I mean, you can only do that in a running race. I mean, obviously there's rules for triathlon in the bike that you cannot like tuck behind people, so don't do that. But if for a running race you want to, kind of utilize other racers to help you, but don't follow exactly what someone else is doing, because maybe they're surging ahead or whatever, and maybe you just, that's not a time for you to do that. So you have to really think about your own strategy and not someone else's. And yeah, that's where I would leave that one, I
I
think.
think that the primary thing, the primary takeaway is that I don't want you to think that you know what that person's strategy is, because you don't know what that strategy is. So you don't know that, why are they riding in a way that they are riding? Could be because that, let's say that they think that their run is going to be poor. They're not fully trained on the run, so they're trying to quote unquote bank time by riding
Yeah.
hard, because they know that they can't run the whole segment of the race, or they have a different strategy for the run, if they're going to use like a run walk method, or whatever their strategy is. So they're riding the bike purposefully hard because of their strategy for the run. Now, if you try and catapult yourself and piggyback off of that strategy, you're going to be riding the bike harder than what you intend, and now you've sabotaged your run because you assumed what their strategy was and you allowed yourself to get caught up into it. This is a discipline thing. This
Yeah.
is a focus thing. It's like,
Patience,
I
discipline.
need to this is my race, this is my strategy, and I'm responsible for executing my plan, not trying to piggyback off of somebody else's plan because you don't know what their plan is.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's do the next one. I think I can talk a little bit to this, and then I think I want you to chime in too, because you have more experience. But poor transitions. So this is really kind of more for obviously like triathlon, where you're going to have those transitions. And I think from my experience, I was never like great at transitions. I never got like super speedy through them, but I do think over time I kind of learned, okay, I've got to, when I go to set this up, like it's got to be set up in a way that kind of makes sense. Like, how am I setting up my bike, and how am I putting my helmet so that I can just like grab these things and throw them on, and throw my shoes on. Some people were able to like actually put their shoes on their bike and then like take run and get their shoes on. There's different ways you can do it, but I think maybe when I was in college and doing the team, we actually had times that we like just practiced transitions, and getting the wetsuit off and getting the bike stuff on, and because that was one of my hardest things, is getting that dang wetsuit off. And sometimes they would have someone pulling them off for you, but those, just being prepared for that, because I think having some practice is really important. And if you just sort of shove all your stuff around and you have no organization to it, then it's going to be really hard for you to find the things you need and make sure you're organized to get everything going in those transitions. So I don't know if you have any other tips or thoughts on that, but I think practice is again something that would be worth it for triathlon to really figure that out.
I did an episode from the Triathlon 101 series where it was like what to expect on race day, and in that video or in that episode, I did talk about setting up your transition. And so if you want some more specific insight into how to set up an efficient transition area, check out that episode. So it was part of the Triathlon 101 series. And it was like what to expect on race day. Don't panic or something like that was the title. And that content is in there. So I don't want to rehash that a lot. But I will absolutely piggyback off of Katie's statement. It's like, this is something that you have to practice. You can't come in, you've practiced swimming, you've practiced running, and you've practiced cycling. So it's unreasonable to think that you can perform efficient and quick transitions if you have not practiced those, just like you practiced the other three things that you're going to be doing that day. It definitely requires more experience in trying to minimize those. I still struggle with this, in trying to get fast transitions, but for me in particular, if I can keep them under 5 minutes, I consider it to be a success. Many people will say, well, 5 minutes is way too long. If you're looking at it, that's like 10 minutes of non-forward movement for your race, and that's a lot of time. I agree with that, but there's a reason that I use that particular strategy and method. And, to me, it helps calm my nerves a little bit. I don't like feeling rushed because that increases my anxiety. And so now,
Uh-huh.
if I'm going into the next thing already anxious because I tried to get out of transition quicker, to me, that just kind of like backfires for me. So I may take a little bit more of my time. I'm not by any means like sitting there eating stuff or just, camping out, but I am purposeful, but I'm not rushing myself because I know once I rush myself, I may miss something. There's something
Right. You
that,
don't
that
want
I
to you don't
may
want to
not
leave something
do
behind that you need.
correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So,
that is episode 78, that your first triathlon race day, what to
yeah.
expect. So if people want to go back, they can look at that. So
But the flying mount that you alluded to with your bike, with your shoes on the bike, many people have come to me about that. It's like, hey, is this worth it? You know, my thing is I've never done it. I've always put my shoes on in
I think I
transition.
tried it once and I crashed.
And I've seen so many people execute this so badly that the time that you think that you're saving trying to get your feet into the shoes and things like that, and the distraction that you're going to be under while you're trying to settle into the bike and everybody else is around you, to me it just doesn't pay off. So unless you really practice it and you become really, really efficient at it and good, it's not something that I recommend for people. It's like, look, just put the shoes on, put them in
Take your
transition.
time, just
Just, it's fine. If
yeah.
it takes you another 30 seconds to put your shoes on and run with your shoes, or a minute, think about the time that you're going to spend you're riding slower because you're looking down at your feet, trying to put your feet into the shoes. Whether you have the mobility and the flexibility to actually lean down and put and strap the shoes on, or tighten the cable and still maintain forward momentum on your bike. But I've seen so many people just fall right over. And so it's like, okay, well, what purpose did that serve? So if you're going
Yeah.
to try it, practice it. It's not
Practice
something
it.
that I find to be all that rewarding
Yeah.
and
Maybe for
have a
like
big ROI on.
a pro or something. I don't know. But yeah. All right. Let's I think
So
we've
the next
got
one is going to be the poor race day logistics, and this is something that's near and dear to my heart because I have big time anxieties, and
mhm.
so the funny thing about triathlon is there's a phrase, it's like it's hurry up and wait. You're rushing to get somewhere just to stand around and wait for it.
True for for
So
certain races and marathons too, because
yeah,
I know Boston or even like New York City, we had to get on the ferry and we had to get over there. And then it's like I mean, I think we were over there by 7 or 7 a.m. And it's like, oh, now the race doesn't start for 2 hours, but because of the logistics of it, and in that race particularly, they don't really have people like dropping you off. You have to take like whatever mode of transportation, like the ferry or the bus or Maybe there's other ways to get there. Yeah, it's like, hurry up, get on. You got to get on at 5:45 onto the ferry and then get over there. And then you're just waiting around, until you start. Um, I think that's true for certain races, but it's that anxiety of like making sure get there on time, that you're there. And even if you have to wait, it's that anxiety of making sure you get to the ferry on time or get to the bus or, get in the car and get to the race start on time. And then it is a lot of times then once you're there, you're kind of like, okay, unless it's a local race. But
We always underestimate the time it's going to take to get to the venue, because now you got to deal with traffic, you got to find parking, and actually, and if you can't park close to the venue, now you got to walk in. So those are always underestimated, and so there's nothing worse than showing up to the venue and now you feel rushed. Now I've got to like lay my stuff out, I got to get prepared, I got to do my warm up, and maybe you're going to have to sacrifice some things because you didn't plan appropriately or accordingly. So it in this particular instance,
the bathroom for the running, you
is
have to
another
use, like, that's
huge
what
one.
causes me the most
Yep.
anxiety is like, are there enough porta potties? And am I gonna have to wait in line, And then if I have to wait in line, am I gonna make it to the race start on time? And that causes, I think, more anxiety than anything else for me for running, because otherwise running's pretty simple. We don't have like a bunch of transitions, but it's, just kind of logistically thinking about that piece, and getting there on time so you have a chance to use the bathroom before it gets super busy. And then if you have to use it again, maybe allowing yourself some time to have to wait in the line. Um, yeah, that's
Yeah, the,
that's
the
my
the
thoughts
old
on that.
saying, the saying that where if you're on time, if you're early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late, and if you're late, it's unacceptable. I don't particularly follow that follow that thought process, but for race day, I do.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I think it's important. I mean, if you get in it, you want to be there on time, and it does cause a lot of anxiety if you're running behind. So just trying to think about it ahead. Okay, when does this start? Really thinking about the time it's going to take to maybe walk or to park, and consider all of that. And yes, you may have to wake up a little earlier, but um, it's worth it to get there on time and not be stressed about it. And yeah, and then they say the night before the race, most people don't sleep well anyway, and it's not that night that matters. It's the night before the race, or the nights before the night before the race. So, just kind of keeping that in mind, like getting that extra 30 minutes of sleep, but getting there late isn't probably worth it. Yeah, so let's go to the next.
number 10 is no clear race plan.
So no
All right,
clear
it's
race
all good.
plan, no thought at all to how your race is, how you're going to execute your race. And I mean, that might be, I don't know. I guess
I think
it's
it
maybe
depends
for
on
like a
the
brand
race.
new. Yeah, it
Yeah.
depends on the race what you're like. If I'm just getting into just like a local race and it's just kind of for fun, or I'm just trying to see where I'm at, I might not have like a true clear race plan. But for the most part, when it's like my A race, like for me, grandma's coming up, like I'm not this early, but I already sort of have a pace in mind, but at least a month before I start to look at the race course map. And I'm starting to study a little bit. What is this going to be like? What are the landmarks? Like maybe there's videos I can watch. Maybe there's a course preview. I'm starting to really think about this, and I'm thinking about how I'm going to execute the race. How am I going to make sure I slow myself down so I don't get caught up, like we talked about, and going too fast early on? What points what are the aid stations? When am I going to fuel? Like this is all things I'm thinking about at least like probably a month out, really trying to figure this out. And then, yeah, like some of those, if this happens scenarios, like if it's hot, this is how I might change my plan a little bit. Or if, something kind of comes up, how I might pivot a little bit. But I'm thinking about that, earlier on, and how I might manage different scenarios that happen. It might come up during the race. Like I'm not tolerating the fueling, or something happens like in the race. How am I going to kind of manage that? You don't want to think of every single scenario. I mean, it's a fine line, because you don't want to cause so much anxiety thinking of every possible scenario and everything. I mean, sometimes there's things that come up that you just don't know, you didn't expect. You can't think of every scenario, but thinking of like the major things, and then kind of how you're going to execute it. And then just really like the pacing, the fueling strategy, like for New York, the pace, there's a lot of hills. So I had to kind of think about how I was going to pace differently each mile almost, because the hills were throughout the race. And I think there's even a thing I used, like a pace I had like a little wristband thing that I created, or you can even purchase. It's like race band, and they have them for different races too, where they actually like each mile split is a little different based off of the terrain. I mean, you can even get that specific. You don't have to, but I just wore it. Just it wasn't like I was trying to hit each pace perfectly throughout the race, but I wore it so I had an idea at certain markers, especially like 5K, 10K, where I wanted to be and what my time was. Because once you kind of get further in, it's harder to do the math. You're like, well, where am I? You know what I mean? Like, what's am I on pace? You know, it's sometimes so having like a wristband or something to kind of keep you accountable, or to be able to see if you're hitting your paces might be worth it for a marathon specifically. And then it kind of takes some of that anxiety out because you have a plan. You know what you're going to do. You get there, and all you have to do is kind of execute your plan. There is no guessing. Yeah, that's my 2 cents anyway. Any
I think
thoughts?
that this
Anything?
one is basically a wrap up of all the
Wrap up.
9
Yep.
previous ones that we've talked
Exactly.
about. So if you've thought about those first 9 ones, then this one really kind of takes care of itself. I agree that a race plan should only be as detailed as its importance to you. So if you're going in and it's a C race, it may not be worth it to really kind of like come up with a race plan. It might be something where you're just like, I want to try a new strategy or something. I want to try a new, I want to go, my goal for this C race is I want to ride the bike as hard as I possibly can to see how that affects my run. That's your strategy. Now, if somebody's going to piggyback off of you because they didn't have a strategy, then they've now sabotaged their day. But that was your plan going in.
Yeah.
But you didn't set a plan to maximize overall performance. You set a plan that to specifically test a particular aspect of your racing. So your race plan is going to be, like I said, a function of what kind of race that you're doing. If you're going into your A race, and I agree with Katie, if you're going into your A race and you don't have a plan, then what have you been doing for this entire training period?
Right.
Because
it's like everything should be kind
like,
of
why risk
accumulated
it?
into that final. That's all what we're
Yeah.
doing. We're practicing, we're training, we're practicing fueling strategies and things that should be what you've been doing all along. So you should it shouldn't even take that much effort, really. You should have been doing all of this all along. It shouldn't be like a a thing you're doing, spending hours on trying to
Because
figure out
I
like
think
the week
the
before.
purpose of the purpose of the race plan is to give you pre-made decisions, because your ability to make good decisions is affected by your fatigue levels. So as you get more and more tired throughout the duration of your race, your ability to make rational decisions may start to fall off a little bit. So if you have this plan already set, then there's nothing for you to even have to decide on. You're just executing it. You're just following the plan. It's just like, okay, well, I don't have to really think about a whole lot. That's not to say that there's not going to be decisions that you have to make, because there's going to be stuff that falls outside of that
Mhm.
plan. How is my plan now going to have to change now that we've got dew points in the upper 70s, and it's hot and humid, or it's windy. Now you have some decisions to make, maybe on the fly. You didn't expect that to be on race day, and you formed your strategy ahead of time, and you didn't have enough time to go back and change that. Then yeah, you're going to have to make some on course decisions. But I think that those situations are probably more rare than they are. This the exception to the rule and not the rule itself, is the way that I would characterize that. But a failure to plan is a plan to fail. That adage still
Old
remains
adage, yeah.
true, especially when it comes to endurance sports. And exactly, you should be testing this plan, this strategy throughout, from starting from week 1 all the way to your taper week. That should be one of your primary goals of your training, is to test this strategy and come up with your race day plan and strategy.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, it kind of wraps up the whole discussion. I think along with this too, just one more thing regarding running is like sometimes the strategy or plan will change a little bit based off of how your training's going. So you might go into a training plan with a specific target of I want to execute like this marathon in this pace. But if something happens during the training that makes it so you won't be able to maybe run that pace, during the training, and leading up to the race, you might have to kind of change the goal of the race and the pacing strategy a little bit because of what's happening in your training too. So, I mean, that's also kind of part of this is that just because you go into the training, block with a certain goal in mind, sometimes that has to be adjusted during, and that's kind of just part of the process of like the plan. That's why the plan is kind of changing, and sometimes it doesn't really kind of like finalize maybe until the week before, but you should be like thinking about it and strategizing for it like throughout the whole training process. But that's the thing too is sometimes things happen during training that make it the plan shouldn't be like set in stone really. It need just like a training plan. It needs your race day plan maybe need to be adjusted as well. So this my like my final input on that. I think we covered it well.
Yeah, so I think that if we had to wrap this thing up, I would say that the final statement that would summarize this thing is that race execution or your race day is not necessarily all about how fit you are. It's more driven by how well you executed that particular day. Because I've experienced races where the execution was poor, but the fitness was there. And so my performance didn't represent my fitness, it represented my poor execution. And so I really want to drive this home that if your only concern is accumulating fitness and how fit you are for race day, I think you're missing a major piece of your strategy and your training plan. So if you can nail the execution, then I think that you will see better performance and better durability within the sport and consistency than if you just simply focus on fitness.
Yeah.
So let's wrap
I
this
agree.
thing up. So we're gonna let's do the housekeeping at the end. So if you've enjoyed this episode, and we have, let's see, how many other episodes? This was 87. So we've got 86 prior episodes within the library. If you find the content particularly helpful to you, and you've learned some new things, and you know that there are friends of yours who may also benefit from what we talk about, I would really, really appreciate a like and a comment on the podcast. Share an episode with friends. That's one way to really kind of spread the reach of the podcast, because we do not monetize this podcast at all. We do not have ads and sponsors, so we rely on you guys to spread the word. We do our part as well, but the comments and the reviews are really, really helpful to help others find us as well, and those are greatly appreciated. We also have the closed Facebook group called the Endurance Athlete Journey Podcast Group. This is a place where we do disseminate some extra content. We want to try and grow this community and eventually get to the point where we're taking Q&As. You can connect directly with both Katie and I within the group as well, but really kind of capitalize on others' experiences as well. We do have discussion stuff that goes on in there, and people are sharing their experiences. And so I believe it's a valuable resource for those. And so we hope that you will consider. You just search on Facebook. It's just the Endurance Athlete Journey Podcast Group. Answer one simple question. We'll let you right on in, and we appreciate that. We're also active coaches. So if you are interested in coaching, we are bringing on athletes onto our rosters. So if you are interested in talking to Coach Katie, you can go to fuel2run.com. If you want to reach out to me, Coach Justin, it's at tabularasaracing.com. Katie does run plans as well as dietetic plans for all sports. I focus on just training plans, so it's multi-sport and single sport as well. But check out our websites. We've got we have got a lot of content on both of our websites with blogs and extra videos and things like that. So we hope that you will check us out. Just include us on your list of potential coaches that you're talking to before you make a final decision, and reach out to us, and we can see how we can help you along your journey as well. So we greatly appreciate that. So thank you guys for joining us on episode 87 of the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. I've been your host, Coach Justin, along with Coach Katie, and we'll see you all again next time.
Bye.
That wraps up today's episode of the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. Endurance sports have a way of teaching us patience, humility, and resilience, lessons that carry far beyond the workout. Progress in endurance sports doesn't come from shortcuts. It comes from consistency, discipline, and doing the work when it's not glamorous. Wherever you are on your endurance journey, keep trusting the process and honoring the work you put in each day. If today's episode resonated, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone to help on their endurance journey. Don't forget to join the conversation on our social sites to help build and foster a community where we all learn and support one another. We'll be back with more stories and insights from Coach Justin and Katie. Until then, visit the podcast website at theenduranceathletejourney.buzzsprout.com for more episodes from the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. Have questions or comments about the podcast? Feel free to send us an email at theenduranceathletejourney@gmail.com. For all things coaching, visit Coach Katie at fuel2run.com and Coach Justin at tabularasaracing.com. Again, thank you for listening to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast, and remember to find joy in the journey.